Rebellious Studio presents the Mind Body Podcast with your host, Maria Angelova. Hey, Rebels, welcome to the Mind Body Podcast, your rebellious podcast with me, your host, Maria, where it is all about a strong body, calm mind, healing, and fully living. And today we have a very special guest joining us all the way from Australia. He is an ex-professional athlete and coach and a peak performance specialist, Paul Price. Hello, Paul. Good morning to
Hello,
you.
Maria. How are you?
I am great. How are you doing? I'm so excited you're here.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be invited, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. Yeah, I guess it's morning for me, but it's evening for you.
It's evening time
good
for
evening
me.
to you.
I am so grateful we made the time. We went back and forth a few times, but here we are. We're making it happen.
We finally got here. Yeah.
Before we dive into, I'm fascinated by peak performance. I'm fascinated by some of the work that you do, such as flow. Let's get to know who Paul is. So tell us a little bit about Paul. Who is Paul? Give us 3 words that describe you and a little bit of a backstory behind each one.
I'd say driven. 3 words that describe me: driven, stubborn, and I would say of late, a word that would come to mind would be curious.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess
a bit of a backstory. So driven, I guess, part of my journey has all been about, speaking of flow, like flow state. And really, it's only been of recent years that I've understood this concept and how it actually made sense for the rest of my life, how it actually connected my story or my journey to science and biology and psychology, and what made me do the things I've done. And I guess I explained to a lot of my clients and people I talk to these days that I basically spent my life chasing a flow state around. And so I've been driven for that feeling, that thing, to do the thing that lights me up. Always. It's kind of the only thing I've done. It's the only thing I know. And I think it's, so that's why I would say driven, not driven in terms of results or outcomes. I'm more driven in the feeling of what I'm doing. Like, does it light me up? I guess curious more recently because of this learning journey I've been on and moving into peak performance coaching from coaching sport. Curious about the mind, the body, the spirituality element of flow and different ways that we process things, and how the mind and body work together is really fascinating. And I'm curious more about people and their journey and how their own biology and psychology has had an influence over decisions they make and continues to either propel them forward into optimal decisions, or transitioning into what they need to transition to, or what sort of held them back, and I think that's really fascinating as well. So stubborn, I would say, because I'm a tourist, so apparently we're stubborn. I don't know much about star signs, but it's the only thing I know about tourists.
Funny, guess what my sign is?
Oh, there you go. This could be a very stubborn conversation.
Yes.
But I think I'm stubborn in not settling for kind of the usual. Stubborn in the way that I feel like I don't really give up on the things that I want to chase very easily. And so I think there's a strength in that, but then I think there's also a weakness in that as well. So yeah, I'm still learning about my own stubbornness and how to utilize it as more of a strength as opposed to letting it coming to it as a weakness.
Yeah, I can relate to so many things that you said, and I already have so many questions in my head, but let's start with the question of what is flow, because maybe for some people listening, they're like, what is flow? What is the state of flow? So how do you define state of flow? Because I talk a lot about flow as well, and I'll tell you a little bit more about my definition of flow, but what does flow mean to you, Paul?
Look, I think there's a scientific definition, which makes a lot of sense, but I think from an experiential point of view, it's that moment where you're just losing yourself, and you're just so deeply connected with the task at hand, or the thing around you, or the thing you're immersing yourself in, and just you just sort of become one with that. And you're really just the best of yourself in any given moment when you're in a flow state. So I find that, you know, I think we could use so many different definitions of flow, and I think it's very contextual, but I really feel like it's just when you notice that you're being the best version of yourself, and there's this feeling inside you that this is good. I'm in a good place here. You're kind of in flow, you know, and there's macro flow on a life scale, and then there's, you know, micro flow on a task, you know, sending an email, you know, playing sport, working on a project, a pitch, a presentation, giving a talk. Like, you know, flow is not limited to anything really. We're hardwired for it, and kind of one part of my purpose is to help unlock that in people. In, you know, how do we find more flow in the mundane? How do we find more flow in the exciting things? And how do we just create a lifestyle around the feeling of flow? And I think that for me to give it a real kind of definition would not do it justice, because I think each of us would express it quite differently.
Yeah. I teach Pilates, and I say the top level of Pilates is flow. And that's when you can flow in Pilates. So as a physical modality, while you maintain proper engagement with the biomechanics are right, the breath is there, the alignment is there, and you're just flowing, and you make it look easy when in fact it's really not easy, but you're just into the moment, into the exercise, and you move from one exercise to the next. And it's really an art form to get to that level. But then what I do is I take that from the Pilates and apply it in life. Do you feel like you're flowing in life, or are you constantly pushing and struggling? And, you know, along with that comes like the stress and the anxiety, which used to be very good friends of mine. Prior to me even realizing that there is such a thing as flowing in life. And you mentioned a couple of keywords before, such as mindset and spirituality. And I will tell you, I came from a family of academia. I did very well in school. I did very well in corporate. And I thought I got it together. I know. And I uncovered this whole world that, like you said, like once you start discovering, you're like, wow, like, how did I not know anything about that? How did I know so little about myself? And the more I find connecting to myself and to my purpose, which I'd love to talk about the context of purpose, or rather about purpose in the context of flow, I find myself exactly like you said, like exhilarated, uplifted, and just driven to keep going, because it's so fun and it's so nice, and it's a completely different experience than the experience I had before.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense in the context of, you know, you use the word struggle, you know, like there's a model called the flow cycle, which I often refer back to in a lot of my work with clients, and be it athletes or executives. You know, struggle, you know, flow is not void of struggle. In fact, struggle is a requirement of flow to meet the, you know, the neurochemical markers that show up in flow state. You know, there's got to be an element of struggle, because if there's not that little bit of challenge, then we tend to not really pay much attention. And flow, you know, flow follows focus. We get flow from what we focus on, and if we're focusing in the right manner. But so stress is healthy to a certain point, but it's how do you mentally manage that? How do you mentally perceive what challenges in front of you to point you in the right direction to your release and then into flow state? So I find that because we're hardwired for flow, like we're human beings, like flow is in us all. You know, it's the perception of what's happening from any given moment to moment that really kind of points you in the right direction or moves you away from it very quickly. So how we manage that struggle phase is really essential to getting more flow. So if you think about the concept of Pilates, it's like I'm trying to hold my core, I'm trying to do this, I'm trying to move one leg and the other arm. And so there's an element of mastery and practice that comes along with that to get to that point where you just can you know, surrender to the moment and let your innate inability to your intuition take over and just guide those movements in a connected harmony that, you know, is life. But you know, that's a really difficult concept or difficult thing to achieve in a macro state of life. Like, again, we kind of think that there's this element of flow. Like if I find flow in my life, everything's going to be easy and joyful and blissful and things. It's like, no, it's not. Like, in fact, if you find more flow, you're probably going to meet more struggle. But your perception that, flow helps us manage that struggle more gracefully because it's such a rewarding experience. But many of us we have that, but we don't recognize that process. And so we kind of, every time we get to that struggle, we just bang our heads against the wall quite often, not knowing what to do and how, mentally get stuck. So that's finding that process, that framework is really helpful to help navigate people through a flow state, even, if it's an athlete in the moment or thinking about building a business, like building my business for the last 4 years or 3 years has been, full of struggle phase. And, you shared with me prior to that, like we think that we find our passion and purpose and everything's going to be easy and flowy and beautiful. And, we can't sell that. That's because it's not true. Because to get the flow, we need the struggle. It's the yin and yang if we go into the spiritual aspect of Taoism and flow philosophy. But there's so many directions we can take this, right? But I guess
it's I completely agree with what you're saying, because yes, this life that I love everything that I'm doing, but that's not to say that there are not surprises and like, oh man, why didn't this work, right? Absolutely. And I think that's what pushes us to grow further. But tell me if you agree, my perception, you said it, my perception and the way I'm handling those struggles now is completely different than the way I would have handled them before. Because now there is more of the acceptance. Now I don't view things as, well, that was a failure. It's like, okay, so what am I missing? What is the lesson? What is the opportunity for me to grow and take myself to an even better version of myself? And then there is the acceptance, there is the trust, there is the surrender, instead of the beating on myself, the negative self-talk, the stress, the inability to sleep. So I absolutely agree. Like we continue to grow, and I like the analogy to Pilates. It's through the discomfort that you grow and you get to flow. It's entrepreneurship, is you grow as an entrepreneur because of the discomfort. But I think your state of mind when you're in a flow state is very different for me than it was before.
Yeah, I kind of use the thought, and again, if you ask people about what is their mindset when they're in a deep flow state, they can't tell you. Like, what is your mindset? We're in such harmony with everything that's going on that we actually don't know that we even have a mindset. Like we've just, it's not even, what's your plan? What do you, this. We're kind of just in such an autonomous process that one decision flows from the next, seamlessly effortless. And so what is our mindset? So, but what I find is, again, coming back to the concept that we're all wired for flow. So the start of flow, before we get to flow, we get in our own way so much, physically and cognitively, like both, like through our thinking and also through our physical habits. We can block ourselves from getting into that flow state regularly or more often. And so quite, in terms of my work, Inspired Peak Performance. So Inspired is all about how do you create the space for flow to actually be possible. And this is your kind of well-being, your nervous system through breath work and recovery strategies. And then, the peak phase is all about your motivation, your drive, your passion, purpose, values, goals and behavioral alignments, and sort of stepping into, when motivation, because, even our passion, purpose and intrinsic motivation will fail us at some point. Extrinsic motivation only lasts 90 days. It's very fleeting and very, not that useful. But then when those motivational cues fail, what we've got to step into then is grit. So we've got to grit our way through that. But then recognizing when we do start to grit and go through, and it's just a constant struggle, and we're fighting it a bit more, and we're pushing through it through kind of our values, discipline, focus, leaning into those things and doing it a bit tougher. We've got to recover more from that as well. It's a tougher process, but and then the performance element is about the conditions of flow. Like, how do you actually perform in flow? And once you're in flow, how do you stay there or get back in to that flow state? is crucial as well. So they're kind of the three areas that I tackle with my clients to help them kind of create that either in their workplace or their sporting environment, but then also away from that. So I believe that what we do away from our task that we want flow in, has more to do with the fact of whether we get into flow or not than we do when we're actually in front of that thing we want to do. For me, if I was an athlete, presenting or doing a workshop, how I set myself up and prepare my mind and body to optimally perform has more to do with my performance than it does in this moment of performance, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the preparation, yeah.
Because if I prepare in the right way and get myself into the right state of mind and body, and then allow the drop into flow happen through taking action, and release and surrender to that, then I'm kind of good to go. Like I just got to keep riding that wave through. The things that can distract us and bring us out of flow is another thing. How do we manage that, or how do we learn to accept the distractions or the things or the mistakes that we make, and not beat up on ourselves because we made a mistake? Just keep going. Mistakes are a gateway to where the magic happens. I believe so. So it's an interesting world and dynamic, but the crazy thing about it is it can be it's relative to everything we do.
Yeah.
For most.
That's why in my case, combining Pilates with mindset works so well, because I use the principles of Pilates and how you show up on the equipment or on the mat to life. And something important that you brought up, Paul, that I kind of wanted to touch. Well, two things. One, you brought up, the grit versus rest and recovery, right? Because sometimes we get too much into that push, and there is no rest. And I would love to hear your opinion on that. And then completely blanked out on the second one. Oh, yes, I know. I was talking to one of my athletic clients. We were practicing something and he goes, Maria, but I'm doing this slow motion. And I said, I understand. But I said, if you cannot do this correctly, slow motion, what are the chances you're going to do this correctly, fast motion? So you have to master the biomechanics and how this is done slowly. And then you start adding the speed to it. And I said, just like Pilates, just like what we do, you don't come the first day and we add flow and higher reps, you start baby steps. So I'd love to hear your opinion as a peak performance specialist and an athlete, as a world-class athlete on those two topics.
Yeah. So I guess on the grit and recovery aspect, one of the very first places, or one of the very first things I want to know with any client is, what do you do to recover? And because recovery is performance. So one of the misconceptions I think we have around performance and recovery is that they're separate. Mm-hmm. But they're not. They're one and the same thing. There's preparation, performance, recovery. That's the cycle. It's the cycle for an athlete. It's the cycle for reflective practice as well. Reflection should be in there as well. That's, to keep it simple, preparation, performance, recovery is a simple rule to go by. And especially when we're having to fight and challenge ourselves, fight against ourselves a little bit, where it's a bit harder, we've got to find a way to get through it. We just got to suck it up and get it done some days. When some days we've got an abundance of energy and motivation and inspiration, we almost can't stop ourselves, which is also equally avoiding recovery. So I quite often start with, let's flip this on its head a little bit. Let's talk about, if we think about that order, let's prepare to perform, then let's perform, and then let's recover. What if we actually flipped it a little bit and went, let's recover first, then prepare,
then perform.
Yeah. And then go back to recovery, or reflect and then recovery.
Mm-hmm.
Because in that recovery phase, so that's where all the magic happens. That's where the learning happens, the growth, the adaptation, physical and mental. And sleep, obviously our number one high performance recovery tool, or performance enhancement tool. Mm-hmm. We learn. It's where we learn. It's where all the neurons. The brain does its magic in that place. So we need to be able to execute recovery as an elite performer. So, if you ask someone, are you a high performer? They'll say, yeah, I'm a high performer. I work 12 hours a day. I go to the gym and I do this and I do that and I don't stop and I just grind and grind and grind. That to me is not a high performer. That's a burnt out
But I
waiting to
think
happen.
it's a stereotypical misconception, because I'm very, did you rest? What did you do to rest? Did you sleep? And sometimes people in the beginning are like, well, no, I was busy, I had to do all of these things. And it's like, you can't perform well if you're tired, if you're overworked, if you, haven't eaten well, haven't hydrated, haven't slept, like all of the basics. And like, even for fitness, I insist you should take time off. You should take at least a day off to rest your body.
Yeah. This is for the mental game and the physical game. There's got to be a recovery program in place. And so if we're talking more on the the executives that are more casual athletes that work out once a day or 5 days a week or whatever their structure is, we don't often think about recovery from the mental turmoil, the stress that we do put our body and mind under, the being in a sympathetic drive in our nervous system the whole time. So one of the concepts I love is implementing micro recovery breaks throughout the day, be it walk, getting out in nature, some breath work, non-sleep deep rest protocol, like 10-15 minutes, a yoga nidra, hot cold shower, plunge, sauna. Like this, there's so many things we can do to recover our mind, that actually and our body. But if we talk about being in flow, like if we do get flow, we are depleting a lot of our mental resources, especially neurochemically, our focusing mechanisms. So that really will last us 60 to 90 minutes. And after that 60 to 90 minutes, if we start pushing through and we're sort of mentally fatigued, our productivity significantly drops. The quality of our work drops. Our ability to make good decisions is impacted. So sort of try and implement these flow blocks. This is why athletes train for, an hour to 2 hours, and then they rest for a period of time and they come back and do it again. They don't train 7-8 hours straight. So I try and take my corporate clients through a journey of like, I'm going to treat you more like an athlete than I'm going to treat you like a corporate executive right now, even though my job is to prime you for decision-making, productivity, focus, leadership, and to find that space of flow where you can show up and be the best, bring the best of yourself to the table no matter what. But it starts with recovery. For sure.
Hear that? Starts with recovery. You have to recover. You have to rest. That comes from a pro, okay? World champion.
Yeah, rest is performance. Performance is rest. So.
All right. And on the other question of slowing down to deepen your work.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. I think in terms of mastery, we all want to get good at something really fast. We always want to get better. We always want to do, we're always wanting to skip steps, especially if you're a high performer. There's a tendency to want to just, okay, yeah, I get that part, but let me get to the good part. And this is definitely it's one of the things we tackle quite often on a daily basis. Athletes do this as well. They forget about the fundamentals of what are the basics of their sport.
Yes.
And the more elite that I got, playing professional squash, the more I realized that I just have to get really good at the simple stuff.
Exactly.
If I master and continue to master the simple stuff, this is why Kobe Bryant would go down and practice, free throws, thousands of them, and Jordan, and these types of guys that would just practice the basic things that you think, well, they can do it in their sleep. Yeah. They can do it in their sleep because they continue to practice, right? Mm-hmm. But to find flow at the beginning of learning skills or developing a craft or whatever it is you're focusing on, slowing down allows our ability to lower the challenge in front of us. So let's use playing the guitar, for example. Like if someone was learning to play the guitar and trying to do a scale, right? Quite often we have to start very slow. Dun, 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 dun. And then once they get the hang of that slow, we tend to want to speed up, and then we go too fast, and then we mess it up. And then we can get a bit frustrated because we're not doing it like Eddie Van Halen would. But what you're doing is you're just wiring in the networks to fire
exactly what it is. You're reprogramming your
Yeah. And so slowing down and finding your ability to flow in that moment. And Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's work, one of the main kind of flow triggers is the challenge skill balance. He talks about, we've got to find the perfect channel between skill and challenge. So if, for me, if I picked up my guitar, and I can play the guitar, but I'm not the greatest at scaling and soloing. But if I was to try and play an Eddie Van Halen solo, I'd mess it up very quickly, and I'd probably get frustrated, and I'd probably get very anxious and overwhelmed and be like, I can't do that. And I'd stop doing it. So that's where my skill level doesn't meet the challenge involved. But if I broke down the first 5 notes of that solo and go, okay, let me do the first 5 notes, dun, 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 really slowly, dun, 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 and do it over and over again until I could go da, 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 and then add the next part in. Da, 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 da. Eventually, I'd probably be able to learn that. It would take me right today, like probably months and months of practice. But that's the way we go. But if I can find my flow within breaking it down into small, concise, clear goals, and find that flow channel of where my skill level can meet the challenge, which is just challenging enough, not trying to go too fast, but not trying to do it too slow. Because if I go too slow over and over again, I'm probably going to get bored as well. So I've got to find that right level of engagement. So this applies to anything we do, learning. So if we find that flow channel, what we know is that learning is amplified. Like we learn faster in flow. So to slow down and find that channel, that flow channel, that perfect blend between challenge and skill, we're actually going to speed up our progress significantly. But not just that, we're going to elevate our enjoyment and our engagement, which then if we get that on the back end of 30 minutes of guitar practice, we're going to walk out of that exercise feeling brilliant because we've got such positive neurochemistry involved, and craving not just the ability to play those notes, but the experience and the feeling of what flow feels like, and how in that 30-minute practice, I just lost myself to anything that's out in the world. Any problems, stress, trouble, issues were all gone. And my body and mind were all connected in one place, doing something that actually lit me up and made me feel inspired.
Yeah. And, I think that's very powerful in terms of being present into whatever you do, whether it's guitar playing or playing squash or doing Pilates or running or whatever it is, being present into it 100% and really being into whatever you're doing with intent and purposefulness. It's a powerful.
And just on that, I think it's important to touch on our breathing, the impact that our breathing has on our ability to get into that flow state. And again, like this is probably the most newest layer of my work is going, unless we can regulate that nervous system and find that optimal state, our breathing will block us from flow. Because we're mouth breathing too much, we're breathing too fast, that's going to send a message to our brain that we're not safe. It's going to raise our anxiety levels, raise our cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine. It's going to make us focus on and activate the amygdala, start looking for what's the danger, what's the threat. And in our world, it's like, people are going to think I'm really crap at the guitar. I can't, what if I play this in front of my girlfriend and she's like, well, my wife or whatever. Like, we start to imagine all these crazy things. Our imagination runs wild, trying to find certainty to keep us safe. And so when we're doing these things, when we are being a bit challenged and struggle, the way we breathe, optimizing your breathing to regulate the nervous system first and foremost, that's one of the key things for me is into that struggle phase. Like get your biology working in your favor first before you actually go into that stressful environment. You're more likely to find a lot of flow.
A couple of weeks ago, because I always talk about breath and people sometimes are like, I'm breathing. I'm like, no, really breathe, like breathe deep. A couple of weeks ago, I did one of my group classes. We really focused on the breath, and we held each movement with a deep breath. And I just told them, feel how much you can release into the breath, how much more depth you can get into and we finished the class. So it was a slower paced class, but a lot of the feedback I got after that was like, wow, I love this. And that all of a sudden there was like this buzz about like, wow, the breath can do so much for you, even though you keep saying, keep breathing, keep breathing, keep breathing, but experiencing that breath. And a lot of times I'll tell people breathe and they're like, no, they don't. And I'm like,
Yeah.
you're not going to be able to do it. Breath is your friend. You have to leverage the breath to help you get into the position that you want to get versus push against it. And it becomes such a different flowy experience. It's a flowy experience versus straining experience. And you can't do it because especially when your workout gets deep, there is no way you can do the exercise if you're not breathing. So 100% agree with what you're saying. Yeah.
And I think the key to that, and I think, we were introduced by a mutual friend now, contact Dave Nelson, who has his fitness flow state. He's all his sessions start with a breathwork protocol. So, and the reason I love that is because, coming back to one of your points earlier, was that if we can't master something before we make it more challenging, then it's going to be hard for us to do that. So teaching people how to breathe, or, activate the diaphragm, slow down their breathing first in a controlled environment, like just sitting.
Mm-hmm.
If people can't do that without going, what the hell's going on? What am I doing this for? Like, this is crap and whatever. Or, just if they can't focus on their breathing while sitting still, how do we get them to focus on their breathing in controlled manner, consistent manner, that's conducive to finding more flow, to releasing and moving in, using the experience and moving well, teaching them how to breathe while doing an exercise at the same time is really, it's kind of, they're trying to now play the guitar solo like really fast. So it's like, so if they're having to consciously focus on their breathing while then trying to focus consciously on moving limbs and arms and certain movements, that's challenging. So even with athletes, I'm like, there's certain ways you want to breathe in between points, or, down moments in games or whatever it is, but you've got to be able to train that away from your sport first. You've got to be able to sit there and be able to breathe properly, when you're not under stress.
At some point, you also
properly under stress.
You also have to start integrating it with whatever you're doing, because it's one thing to sit and breathe. It's another thing to have to, it's one thing to have the core engaged while you're standing. It's another core to have engaged while your arms are moving and your legs are moving and your body has to stay stable, right? So you have to start integrating it into the work. And that's
absolutely.
Right. People sometimes are like, I did my breathing work. It's like, no, you take that breathing work and you apply it into the work, you apply it into your daily life, right? When you feel like stressed because you're overwhelmed, there's too much going on, slow down. You know what to do. You know how to regulate your nervous system. Take a nice deep breath. And I think that's where it gets to retraining the mindset of, it sounds too simple to be true. But once you start experiencing it, you realize you have those tools in your self-care toolkit to help yourself to be independent, right?
If you can breathe effectively, it takes care of a lot of the issues that we think we have to work on independently, like your mindset, your self-talk, your negative thinking, all these things that we can struggle with. If we come in with a regulated nervous system, seemingly we don't really have the same stress levels or the same negative self-talk, the same perspective on life or the experience or what that person said. We just, it's almost like it just disappears. Kind of like what I said, like we don't know we have a mindset when we're in flow. And all that comes back to your nervous system. It's your body and mind working in perfect harmony, where you're so present that there is no problems in the present moment generally.
Yeah, and that's a whole other conversation. But I can keep talking to you, Paul. Hopefully you have a few more minutes after the podcast episode.
Yes, for sure.
Paul, what do you tell to somebody who is like, I think I'm in flow, I'm not sure I'm in flow? Like, a piece of advice that you want to leave with our listeners?
I think if you're thinking about whether you're in flow or not, you're definitely not in flow. Flow, I think flow is something we only experience consciously as a reflection.
Mm-hmm.
We only know we've been in flow after we've been in flow. And I think the better we get at the awareness of it, we can sort of go, okay, I think I feel I'm here. But then we also know that if we start to focus on getting flow, we're going to lose flow straight away, because we're now thinking about something that's
Mm-hmm.
not in the present moment. It's something I want in the future now. And so it's a really tough balance, but it's knowing what your triggers are that actually trigger that state for you. And again, it's a very individual thing. So that's why, no matter the sport or athlete or corporate environment, or the challenges that people face or the things they have to do, it's important for me to get to your own individual triggers that makes you get to that space, because it's different for both of us, different for everyone listening here. But if you can go on that exploration of finding what triggers flow for you, you can then start to build your life around these flow experiences that are not void of struggle. There will be challenges and stuff, but you will get more flow, and that makes the challenges way more enjoyable and possible, and non-negotiable. We can sort of accept them. Acceptance becomes a big factor then. So I think the goal is never flow. The goal is to set the conditions up for you to find flow.
Well
That would be
said.
my
Yeah. Arpo, I have to ask you before we wrap up, what's your definition of rebellious?
Oh, I think my definition is to challenge the status quo, to challenge yourself, to challenge your own limited thinking, and not do the expected of you in a respectful and authentic way that also respects difference of opinion, but finding your own way and finding your own flow and going about it that way.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Absolutely. Yes. That's where it came from, because when I was making my change, I got a lot of feedback of that doesn't make sense. Like, why are you doing this? That's crazy. And I thought I need a company name that kind of reflects staying true to yourself. So
No, I love that.
that's, challenging the status quo and being your
Yeah.
truth. That's kind of where rebellious came from for me personally.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks for sharing that. And it's true. You're right. Like, it's just that some people look at certain decisions. When I was a professional squash player, I ranked number 4 in the world. I started playing. I traveled with a guitar and I wrote songs, and I'm like, I want to have a band. So when I moved to Toronto, I started performing live, and my flow kind of transferred from sport into music. And then people were just like, what are you doing? Like, you're one of the best squash players in the world, but you want to play music and start again? And I'm like, yeah.
And it
Like,
doesn't
that's what
make
I
sense to some people, but it makes sense to you.
I've just sort of chased my flow from one thing to the next in my life. And I think that's it's led for an amazing journey that has been really rewarding, but also, but again, not short of challenge. And I wish that would be one thing I wish I knew, that even following your passion and purpose is still going to lead you to challenge. And I think there's a disconnect there. We don't accept that very easily, thinking this should be easy. So yeah, but I love that name, rebellious, and the meaning behind it. So that makes a lot more sense to me. Yeah.
Well, Paul, I appreciate you joining us at a very different time zone. Thanks for the inspiration and for the shared knowledge. And where can people follow you and find you if they have questions, if they want to reach out?
Yeah, great. Reach out. I'm currently offering like a free high performance assessment. So if you want to sort of find out where you are on the flow scale, and where you're blocking yourself from flow, and look at your flow hygiene, as we call it, you can reach me at inspiredpeakperformance.com. Same handle on Instagram at inspiredpeakperformance, and or on LinkedIn, Paul Price. Reach out, connect. I'd love to hear from anybody, and look forward to connecting with some of your audience. And thanks for having me. I've enjoyed the conversation.
Me too. Thank you so much, Paul, here. And you guys know, if you have any questions, please certainly feel feel free to share those. And if not, we'll see you guys next time. Have a rebellious one. Can't get enough of those rebellious conversations? Do make sure you subscribe, like, and share